We're going to go ahead and get started, and I want to start out by welcoming all of you to this webinar about the Casey Foundation's Children and Family Fellowship. Let me say how excited we are about this opportunity to launch another fellowship class, and also just about our delight and our appreciation to all of you who are interested in the fellowship and contemplating the possibility of applying. I wanted to make sure everyone knows that we're recording this webinar. The recording will be posted on the Casey website. It'll also be made available to all of you, given that we have your email addresses. But in case you have to hop off early, please know that it is being recorded, so you'll have a chance to listen to it, not miss anything. My name is Barbara Squires. I'm the Director of Leadership Development at the Casey Foundation. And over the next hour, what we're hoping to do with all of you is to provide you with information about the background of the Children and Family Fellowship, what we're looking for in fellowship candidates to help you make a decision about whether this is the right opportunity for you. You'll have a chance to hear from 3 alumni fellows about their fellowship experience, and then we'll talk specifically about the application and selection process. We're hoping to hold about 10 minutes at the end of the hour for questions and answers, but if any of you have questions as I'm talking or you're hearing from the fellows, please feel free to put those in the chat. Allie O'Donnell from our team is monitoring the chat, and so we'll try to make sure we get as many of those answered as we can. And for those of you who have questions that are much more specific, say to your own situation, you should feel free to also reach out to either Allie or to me directly. We're always happy to respond to questions, and you'll get our contact information at the end of the webinar. So to begin with, Carol, if you want to go to the next slide, thank you. We want to begin by talking about the purpose of the fellowship. So when the Casey Foundation began the fellowship in 1993, the intent was to extend our reach, the Foundation's reach, beyond our grant-making activity. And it was on the belief that if we could influence the way that leaders thought, and took up their leadership with regard to the achievement of improved outcomes for kids and families, that could be a really valuable contribution from the foundation. And so it was with that thinking that the fellowship got started. The purpose of the fellowship, as you can see on this slide, is to increase the number of skilled and diverse leaders who work in the social sector who are able to achieve improved, measurable, and equitable results for the kids, the families, the communities on whose behalf they are working. This focus of the fellowship is very much in alignment with the mission of the Casey Foundation, which is about ensuring that all children in the United States are able to thrive and that there's actually a measurable improved impact on the outcomes for kids and families in this country. So the fellowship was intended to build out the pool of leaders who can achieve equitable results, who can make large system and large scale change and reform that can be sustained over time. And it was also intended to prepare leaders to move into positions of greater influence and greater authority and larger scale over the course of their careers. So that's what's behind the Casey Fellowship. So next slide, Carol. The fellowship is considered our signature leadership program. It's our longest and oldest investment in leadership development, and it actually is the most intensive leadership experience that we offer. But all of our leadership work, including the fellowship, is built on a platform of what we call results count. That is Casey's approach to leadership development, and it is an approach that is intended to build the skills of leaders to achieve measurable and equitable outcomes for kids and families and communities. So this focus on building those skills is what results count is. It's a competency-based leadership approach, and it is at the heart of the fellowship experience. So the fellows who get selected will go through a 21-month fellowship where while they're actually doing their real job. So you'll be continuing to do the work that you do and the jobs that you have while experiencing the fellowship at the same time. And so it's an opportunity to apply in real time what you're learning and getting from the fellowship experience to your work back home. And as we said, it is a 21-month experience, and I'll go over the calendar toward the end of the session. But we believe that the fellowship experience is comprised of the entire 21 months. And over the 21 months, fellows will participate in 11 executive seminars. They also will do work between the seminars where they're applying, as I said, in real time, what they're learning to their work back home and actually trying to move a body of work and achieve an improved outcome over the 21 months. In addition to the seminars, they'll receive coaching, they'll participate in peer-to-peer consultation, and there will be in-between work between the seminars where fellows participate in small group work, they'll do individual work, they'll have coaching with faculty members. So the whole array of these activities comprise the fellowship experience. So it's the totality of the 21 months that makes up the fellowship experience. And selected fellows will be doing this in a cohort of 15 fellows. So you'll be getting a lot of support from your other fellows in your cohort, and you'll be building relationships with those people over the course of the 21 months, as well as building relationships with the faculty and the implementation team. So next slide. There are also longer-term benefits beyond the 21 months of the fellowship term, and that is that after you complete the fellowship, you'll be entering into an alumni network that is made up of the 140 fellows who were in the previous 11 classes of fellows. And the foundation continues to support the alumni network. There are convenings that we host. There are other resources that are made available to our alumni fellows. So the idea is to really continue to support the fellows over the course of their careers. We like to say once a fellow, always a fellow. And we also help to track and support the fellows as they look to expand their reach and influence and move to positions of greater scope and authority. And so we've provided on this slide 4 examples of alumni fellows showing where they were, what the positions that they held at the time that they came into the fellowship, and what they're doing now. So, you know, as you'll see, I'll pick out a couple of these. Michael McAfee, who was in class 8, was working at HUD as a regional manager at the time he was in the fellowship. He is now the president and CEO of PolicyLink. Similarly, Susan Thomas, who was in class 10, was a program officer with the Melville Charitable Trust, and now she's the president of the trust. And so you'll, as you can see and probably can imagine, that there is continued advancement beyond the fellowship term, and we stay close to our fellows as they progress their careers. Next slide, Carol. The real measure of success of the fellowship is not whether fellows are personally transformed by this experience, although that does happen, and in fact that probably is a necessary thing to happen. But the real measure of success is whether fellows are actually able to go on to achieve improved outcomes for the kids and families and communities with whom they work. And so we wanted to provide a few examples of the results that recent fellows have been able to achieve by applying the tools and skills that they learned through the fellowship. So for example, Carla, who's listed here with class 11, she was really focused on trying to support the schools in Los Angeles that were the highest need schools serving Black and Brown students. And the payoff from the results work that she was really focused on was a pretty hefty increase in the investment into schools that serve those students. Similarly, Barti Wahi, who was also in Carla's class, was working on extending in Minnesota the availability of childcare, high quality childcare for young kids in the state. And she was able to work on an increase in the reimbursement rate to childcare providers. And then finally, the third example on here, and you'll be meeting Esther Shin shortly, is the work that Esther and Donovan Duncan, who was another fellow, achieved in growing the income of residents in the public housing developments where Urban Strategies works. And so both increasing in household income and growing the employment rate were byproducts of the work that Esther and Donovan did through their fellowship experience. So we're really encouraging fellows not just to view this, or applicants, not just to view this as a personal growth experience, but a real opportunity to apply what you learn and have accelerated impact during the fellowship term. So with that, it seems like a good moment now to shift over to letting you hear from some of our fellows themselves. And I'm delighted to introduce the three who are joining us. So we have Charles Bradley and Sarah Jonas, who were both in class 11. That's our most immediate class that wrapped up in January of this year. Charles is with the Mecklenburg County Department of Social Services, Youth and Family Services as a division director. Sarah is the acting senior director with the Office of Community Schools with the New York City public school system. And then Esther Shin is president of Urban Strategies, and Esther was in the class before the last one, so she's a class 10 fellow. So let me say again, thank you to Charles and Sarah and Esther for joining us. We want to give you an opportunity as fellows to talk about the experience you had in the Children and Family Fellowship. So the way we're going to do this is kind of interview style. I have some questions for the three of you, and I'll call on certain of you to answer certain of the questions. So you're not all answering all three of them. So let's start at the beginning. And Esther, this one's for you. Why did you even apply for the fellowship?
So, hello, and happy to be here. And to your question, why did I apply for the fellowship? Two significant reasons. One, the organization that I currently work for, Urban Strategies, I've worked with the organization now for almost 23 years. And over that time, we had worked with the Casey Foundation in project work. We were a grantee. And so I was very familiar with the work of the foundation. So one knew the importance of children and families to the foundation and what they were investing in and the kind of projects that they were supporting, and so had a deep appreciation for that. And the second reason is that I had encountered a number of fellows over the course of my career, and what they had told me in terms of how they had transformed their work, how they had been transformed in their person, was really impactful to me, and something that I and my boss at the time really wanted to invest that time and energy for not just professional growth, but what that kind of investment would mean for the organization and the families that I serve.
And Charles, I'm going to ask you the same question. It was roughly 3 years ago now that you probably were considering applying for the fellowship. So what was going through your head and what compelled you to do it?
Yeah, thank you, Barbara, and it's a pleasure to be with you all today. Some of the things that I was thinking about as I applied for the fellowship was really my interest in expanding my leadership skills so that I can have a greater impact and achieve greater results for children and families in Mecklenburg County. I also had the experience to work with and for 3 Casey Fellows, and I really respected their work and seeing how they have grown and developed and moved on to other opportunities, and that was really appealing to me as well.
Thank you. So Sarah, for you, because you also probably were around this time 3 years ago contemplating the fellowship experience, and you went forward with it. So how would you describe the application and the selection process? I know it's no easy feat. So in retrospect, what would you say about it?
So in thinking about this, there's sort of four words that come to mind for me. I put reflective, rigorous, intense, and exhilarating. And I think, reflective, I remember just actually filling out the application itself and thinking that, as a leader, as many of us are in the spaces that we work in, you don't get often enough the opportunity to sort of reflect on your journey, on the work that you're doing, on the results you've achieved so far, on where you're falling short, right? And so the application itself was both, challenging and sort of a welcome opportunity to do that reflection about all of those things, right? And be able to kind of sit with that a little bit. And I remember that I pulled up my application in preparing for this, and I was, kind of struck with like there were questions both about, kind of where you had achieved, and then there were questions about, sort of failure, like a place where you fell short, and in terms of your work as a leader or your results. And again, I think that was sort of like an indicator in a way of what was to come, as far as the approach being, both very much focused on leadership and results, but also on being true and honest and sort of being vulnerable as a leader and then learning in that space. So I found that to be a very reflective process. And then certainly the selection process of kind of coming, making it to like the final group and meeting all of the other finalists and talking with alumni fellows, it was both intimidating and very, it made the whole thing even that much more appealing, because you were suddenly in a room with all of these incredible, dynamic, smart, passionate leaders. And, part of me was like, oh my gosh, do I even belong in this space? And the other part of me was like, oh, I so want to be here working with these amazing, with all of these people, and sort of seeing the synergy that can come from something like that, right, was really appealing. And I think, as Esther and Charles sort of alluded to or spoke to as well, just remembering folks saying, like, every alumni person that we spoke to, every fellow talked about this work being transformative, right? And so that was echoed, I think, throughout the application and selection process, was this is the hardest thing you're ever going to do if you are selected, and the most transformative and rewarding thing you will ever do for yourself as a leader and for the results and for the populations that you are serving.
Thank you. So, Charles and Sarah, given that you're both kind of fresh off of your fellowship experience, in what ways would you say the fellowship experience matched what you expected, and in what ways was it different?
Barbara, you may want to repeat the question because your audio went out a little bit.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay. So this is for Charles and for Sarah. In what ways was your fellowship experience what you had expected, and in what ways was it different? And Charles, why don't you go first?
Yes, thank you. In terms of what I expected it to be difficult, challenging, rigorous, intense, and it hit every single one of them and more. I did not expect it to be as intense, rigorous as it was. Just thinking about the in-session time, just the schedule from 8 to 5, and then after dinner convenings. That's not what I initially expected. I didn't expect the amount of reflective work that we did. Really, the self-work that was required both in session and after session just made me think a lot more about how I show up in role, how I show up in my personal life and with my family. And I didn't expect it to touch me in that way. Starting the fellowship, I really thought about this as a professional development, with some pieces around personal development, but it was equal and if not more on the personal side. Was also an unexpected positive result was the deep connections that I was able to build with my cohort as well as the faculty. I did not anticipate that. I had been in a couple of leadership programs and going through them and quite frankly did not connect with them beyond a few months after the fellowship. But a week doesn't go by that I don't communicate in some way with one of my class fellows. And I've also had an opportunity to connect with alumni as well. So those are things that I didn't expect as I was applying for the fellowship.
Terrific. And Sarah, what would you say?
I would echo everything Charles said. Definitely the intensity of the work was both something that I expected, and I think you can't fully appreciate it until you're in it, sort of the rigor. I think one thing I would add that maybe was unexpected, agreeing with Charles around sort of just how the intense bond that you form as a group, right? But also I think some of the challenges, like, kind of that navigating in the group between sort of connecting and bonding, and then also really being pushed by each other and by the faculty. Like, I think the fellowship pushed me and pushes you in ways that you can't even anticipate, right? And as Charles said, it's both like personal and professional. So be prepared to be kind of pushed, challenged, and stretched even further than you thought you could go. And that is part of the transformation. Like that is good, and that is what gets you, as a leader, to push you to the next level, and also I think what's critical to the results work that we're doing. And the other thing I would say is, I think I didn't fully expect or understand sort of how the fellowship would sort of integrate with my work life. Like, it's very intentionally designed, as you said, Barbara, to sort of be a real, like, not sort of some separate precious thing, but like something that is integrated into your work. And I think I learned a lot about how to sort of break down sort of the like preciousness and the walls of an opportunity like this, and really bring people along with you, and what that really means in your workspace, and how powerful that can be to the transformation.
So Esther, in your response to the first question, you talked a little bit about this, but can you say more about how the fellowship experience changed both you as well as your organization? Because part of our intent is the spread through the fellows to organizational impact. So I'd like to hear more about how that happened for you.
Certainly. So in terms of person, I don't think I really considered person when it came to leadership and being inside of an organization. I will say that I truly believe that if I had not gone through the fellowship, I would be a very different kind of leader, and not necessarily for the better. Things like knowing and recognizing how much of your person shows up in your role, and that all of your experiences show up in all of your work. I don't believe that was as crystal clear to me as it was going through the fellowship. And certainly the importance of vulnerability in leadership. And from a cultural perspective, and for my person, vulnerability is a word that was really not in my vocabulary. And so to really get pushed around that, and how important it is that, when you're leading a team, they really need to believe in you, and they have to really understand why they're following you, and why vulnerability is so important in that. So from a personal perspective, all of those, the fellowship really influenced those ideas. In terms of the organization, I think that staff that are sort of the old guard would tell you that the organization has completely shifted, and that we are completely results focused. So we changed our mission. Our mission is now a results statement. Almost 50% of my staff have gone through rigorous results count capacity building, and the other 50% have gone through some level of results count capacity building. How we do our work has completely shifted, and it's very much demonstrated in the results that we're seeing. When I first started the fellowship, it was 9 months prior to me taking on the head of the organization. And so in looking at our data, seeing that we had maybe increased average incomes by $500, $1,000, and patting ourselves on the back for it, and realizing that we need to do something differently, and that in order to really see positive results for families, having to turn how we had been doing our work sort of upside down and on its head. And results count really pushed us as an organization to think about our work differently, and to think about the term of in service to families. Just that statement alone, I think, had staff thinking about the work extremely differently, and what results really means for our work. So it's been completely transformational for the organization and those that we serve.
And Sarah, how would you respond to the question of sort of personal change as well as organizational change? You're in a governmental organization.
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, just sort of underscoring that that connection between leadership and vulnerability was something that came to mind right away for me too. So that's clearly something that the fellowship really lifts up and sort of emphasizes and develops in us as leaders, and how critical that is. I also, echo that sort of discipline around results work, and sort of being very clear in naming results. And I named this piece earlier as far as, kind of bringing others along with you. And I think this concept of giving the work back is something that really changed me. This idea that, like Esther was saying, you sort of come in with this idea of leadership. And I think honestly, traditionally, a lot of ideas around leadership are around like the leader knowing, doing, holding, all of it. And the fellowship is, really made very clear to me, and I think everyone who goes through it, that, results are completely dependent upon how well as a leader you are activating the leaders around you and the team around you, and aligning with others around you, and that's really what this work is about. So that's something else that was really powerful. And I think as an organization, yes, we're a governmental organization, as you said, and I too, like Charles, was lucky to work with a leader who had also been a fellow, and our team has really invested a lot of time and energy in the results count work in different ways, and folks have kind of taken this up as an organization. So just a few examples of that: it's given us a common language, so kind of talking about results and results work, accountability to results, how are we measuring our results, action commitments that we make in service of results. So it's given us sort of a common language and approach to be able to organize ourselves around achieving results. Also, how we facilitate meetings and conversations we have like a culture in place now that is really about results-based facilitation, and creating agendas that are focused on results and that end with action commitments that folks make. I think that's been transformative. And I'll just say that I remember going to meetings in with other offices or divisions in the DOE, and they were like, "What's this agenda that you're all using? Like, how do we that's really interesting," and sort of sharing that with other folks, right? And it's a constant, learning and discipline around all of this work to hold this, right? It's not always perfect, but that culture shift is definitely in place in our organization as a result of this experience that I had, and that we were able to bring back, and that others on our team have had together.
Thank you. So, there's a lot that goes into results count, the competencies and tools, skills. So Charles, as you think back over your fellowship experience, what was the most compelling, if you can name one, compelling leadership tool or skill or practice that you took away from the fellowship that you continue to use?
Well, it's hard to name one, but I'll kind of combine a couple of them, and just picking up on something Sarah said about leadership, understanding the theory of aligned contributions. There was a time in my leadership before the fellowship that I always thought that child welfare had to lead. But as I got into the fellowship, I learned that we need to align both internally and externally with our partners to achieve a result. So being clear on what we wanted to achieve, and creating a result statement at the beginning of our work, and then trying to align who needs to be around the table. using composition analysis. We really use before action reviews and after action reviews, which has really transformed our work. And in doing that internally, I've seen the result of how the parallel process works as our staff have taken that up. And I just had a great staff meeting, and one of our staff was sharing a great story around how they were able to work with a family in order to create a kinship placement. And it really was the partnership of working with a grandmother and an aunt and uncle, and they were able to get this young child with family. And they really spoke to how we have been inclusive and including them, co-creating, and they were able to carry those practices in their work with children and families. So as others have shared already, that it's really transformed the way I think about my work and how I work with others, and they're able to carry those things out in their work with children and families.
Thank you. So Esther, you were a Class 10 fellow, so it's been a little while since you were actually in your fellowship term, and you've been now a member of the Alumni Network. And so I wanted to ask you if, what that experience has been like to be part of the network, what you've gained from it, maybe again, what was expected or unexpected, but what is the experience of the network been like for you?
So I would use one word to describe my experience with the network, and that is comforting. You know, with the COVID-19 pandemic and leadership being really lonely, and I think that Sarah and Charles could probably, relate. Leadership is a really lonely place. There are only so many confidential conversations you can have with certain individuals, right? You have some really tough decisions to make that others inside your organization might not understand or cannot relate to. And so with the network, you're connected to individuals that are going through similar experiences. And with COVID, there are leaders having to lay off staff, having to make some really tough decisions. And so to have the ability to connect, and we have used multiple platforms to be able to connect. And so to have that and be able to, lean on individuals that are going through similar experiences, to have safe spaces where we can talk about the challenges going on in the world, whether it was George, the murder of George Floyd, or the racial justice movement, and some of the other really stressful experiences in the world over the last year and a half, to be able to have those safe spaces. And then from a professional perspective, comforting in that you've got colleagues that you can just call up to connect and to get ideas from, to share work. We've hired some of the other fellows to consult for us, and they've done the same for us. And so professionally, to be able to leverage experience and knowledge has been extremely comforting. And so the network has offered a lot to me, both personally and professionally.
So the last question, I'm hoping all three of you will be able to answer. And that is, so we're on this webinar with numerous people who are contemplating the opportunity. And so what advice would you give to someone who actually gets selected for the fellowship? Based on your own experience, what would you tell or advise somebody who was just coming into the fellowship? So Sarah, why don't we start with you?
Sure. And I think I'll build on something Esther said about like leadership can be lonely or that sort of piece. I would say that a couple of things around that. I think the first is welcoming. I remember Raj, our faculty member Raj, sort of introducing this concept of like learner stance, right? But sort of being in learner stance. So I think like welcoming that and understanding that is a good place to be. Like learner stance is a good place to be. And what I mean by that is, don't be afraid to ask questions and ask for help when you need it. The other fellows are an incredible source of support and knowledge, and even working together, you can solve complex problems together among fellows, which then helps you and mirrors the kind of aligned work and aligned contributions that Charles was talking about that are essential back home in your workspace, right? So I think not being afraid to ask questions, leveraging your other fellows, and I would say leveraging the faculty. Like for me, the coaching and the availability of the faculty as well to support your work along the way, serve as a sounding board, give you feedback, help you wrestle with complex issues and problems. That's something that I took advantage of many times, even beyond sort of like the formal kind of seminars, like doing that outreach outside of those seminars and really using that. So using the supports that are there in faculty and other fellows, and not being afraid to reach out and do that. It really enriched my work and helped me to think big in terms of the other piece. And so that's the last thing I'll say is like, think big, like come into it, like think as big as you can about your work and the possibilities and your results. And the tools, the strategies, the other fellows and the faculty are there to help you get there, right? Together you can think big and act big and achieve amazing things through the fellowship.
Charles, why don't you go next?
I would really think about and recommend to those that are selected really being thoughtful about connecting with your staff and colleagues about your engagement with this fellowship. They'll be a part of the 360, so they'll get a chance to provide feedback. I would also encourage you to engage your family. The program is very rigorous. It will be taking time away from your personal life and your family life, but it will be worth it absolutely in the end. I would also think about delegation. What can you give up in order to give space? And that's both in your professional life and your personal life. I know for me, I carved out Saturday and Sunday mornings for my reading. There's a lot of reading that takes place, but those are some of the things that I would encourage those that are selected to really consider. And also thinking about how you can share the work, particularly around your selection of your results partner. I think that's a great asset to you, and being thoughtful about sharing that work as we've all talked about. And really your selection of your results partner is critical to that.
And Esther, what advice would you give?
So in addition to what Sarah and Charles have shared, I would add to have faith in the process and to be open-minded, because there are going to be moments where you get really pushed and it can be destabilizing, and you don't have any sense of where the faculty want to go with the work. I'd say trust the process, because in the end, there are a lot of ahas, and as frustrating as the rigor might sometimes be, again, the staff are leading you somewhere that in the end is going to be that much richer for you in your leadership role and in your person. So have faith and be open-minded.
I think we'll pause on my questions for you here, and I'll move into the discussion about application selection. But I do want to thank all three of you for being willing to participate in this. And I believe, I know, Sarah, you have to hop off, but Charles and Esther will stay on through the Q&A session. So if there are specific questions that you want to pose to two of our alumni fellows, you'll have that opportunity. So thank you. Okay, Carol, so then moving on, maybe to this piece that folks might be hugely curious about, and that is the application and selection process. Hopefully some of you have already looked at the application, and you'll see that it is no small thing, so advice there would be to not wait until the very last minute to complete the application, but to do it thoughtfully and maybe pace yourself and do it perhaps over multiple sittings. so that you can really be thoughtful about the responses that you're giving. Carol, if you want to hop to the next slide, this is the timeline. So I guess a couple of weeks ago, whenever May 24th was, we did open the nomination and application process for class 12. Let me just say something about nominations. We welcome nominations for two reasons. One is oftentimes people who have gotten information about the fellowship know other people who have not received the information and think they may be great candidates. So the nominations allow the word about the fellowship opportunity to spread. And so if somebody gets nominated, they then will automatically get notified that they were nominated and get a link to the application. But and the other reason that nominations are important, are helpful, is that they do give us one other person's reflection about the candidate. But nominations are not required. So you do not have to be nominated to go on to apply. And we often get that question, so I want to make sure everybody understands that. But if someone is going to do a nomination, we want all the nominations in by August 20th to then allow sufficient time for the nominee to spend time on the application should they decide to go on and apply. So nominations are due August 20th, and then applications are due September 10th. And so I know it looks like you have the entire summer to get your application done. And I would just say, don't wait till the last minute, but spend thoughtful time on getting your application done. And also just make sure the technology works for you. So that's another reason not to wait to the last minute. Once the applications come in, after September 10th, begins a multi-step process that we have for narrowing the pool of applicants from however many applications we get down to about 30. And those 30 people then become who we consider finalists. So we will notify the finalists by December 14th that they have been selected to be a finalist. Again, the finalist pool we're anticipating to be around 30, and that is then to pick a class of 15 fellows from that. Once folks are notified that they are a finalist, we'll then work with them to schedule travel to come to Baltimore to the Casey Foundation for in-person interviews on February 8th and 9th. And the interview process itself is a little intensive. There are multiple stages to the interview process where there's large group activity that all 30 of the finalists will participate in. There are a small group activity that you'll do as well. And then there will be a series of interviews that folks will be invited to participate in, sometimes alone and sometimes in pairs with another finalist. But there are many dimensions to the 2 days of interviewing, and that is to give us many opportunities to see how the finalists show up, and then make a decision about the class of 15. And part of that is not just who we think are the 15 to get selected, but also the fit between the 15. Because they will be together as a cohort for the 21-month period. We will announce the 15 fellows in class 12 by February 25th. And then the fellowship term for class 12 will launch in April of 2022 and go all the way to January of 2024. And so it's over those 21 months that the 11 seminars are held and the other work, the in-between work, will occur. So that's essentially the timeline for getting from where we are now at the very beginning of the application process to the final selection and the launch of the fellowship. So next slide. So let me just say a little bit about eligibility. We do consider the fellowship for mid-career leaders, but need to define a little bit what we mean by mid-career. To be eligible, you have to have at least 10 years or more of professional experience, if you want to consider it in the social sector or in fields that serve children and families. This can be cumulative over many different jobs that you might have had. So it's not 10 years in the same job or the same organization. But over the course of your career to date, we're also looking for the job changes that you've made and whether there's an indication of movement into positions of increasing authority and influence. To be eligible, the current work that you're doing has to be in the United States on domestic issues. The Casey Foundation is not an international foundation. We do our work domestically in the 50 states and territories. So that's where the current work that you're doing needs to be happening. And then the last point that I'll make is that you need to be able to attend all of the seminars and the activities that constitute the fellowship term. And in the application materials, we've gone ahead and listed all of the dates of the 11 executive seminars. And this is something that we really attend to, and that will, if you're advancing in the selection process, there will be multiple times where we will again and again confirm with you that you've vetted all the dates and that you absolutely can attend everything. This is an intensive and a really rich opportunity, and we can only accept 15 people into the fellowship pool, and so we really want to make sure that the 15 who are selected can fully participate, and that's why we spend a lot of time and attention sort of drilling down on the attendance factor of this. And so in light of that, also related to eligibility is that we ask that candidates not be going through another fellowship at the same time that the Children and Family Fellowship is occurring, and that you not run for public office during the 21-month term of the fellowship. And the reason for that is to participate in another fellowship, to be running for public office, all create big demands on your time, and we don't want to be competing with that sort of thing. So we want folks to be able to clear their calendar and really give their full time and attention to the fellowship, plus their work and family. And to the point that Charles made, we really do encourage you to vet this opportunity with your professional family, your supervisor, the people who work with you, to make sure that they understand what you're committing to, and that you have the support and approval of your organization to participate, and then that you also do that with your family. It is a big time commitment, and it does require that you be away from home. And so we really want to make sure that your family is also supportive of the opportunity. I will say one other thing at this point, because it may be on your minds, and that is that we know we all have been living through the pandemic for the last year and a half. We are fully anticipating right now that the fellowship will be conducted in person. It doesn't launch until April of next year. And so right now we have every intention that we will be able to do the fellowship in person. And so I'm imagining that might be a question that some of you have. Okay, finally, characteristics of a fellow, if you want to go to the next slide. So these are some of the things that we're looking for as we think about the candidates for the fellowship. We want people who are have a track record of accomplishments, who who, clearly are on a path, and they can express through their application, and we can see through their resume that they are on a path and have a series of accomplishments that they've had, and that they are also ambitious to do more, that they want to have greater impact in the work that they do and the world in which they work. We want people who are energetic, as you heard from our alumni fellows. This is not for the faint of heart, and there are big asks of time. The days are long, and so we want people who've got the energy to do this and to make the commitment, and again are able to actually put in the time. So that's really important. We pay attention to race, ethnicity, class, gender, language in the work of the fellowship, and so we want fellows who are aware of the importance of all of that and who can really center equity in the work that they do. I know we didn't touch on that a lot in the questions with the fellows, but equity and equitable results are very much at the heart of the work of the fellowship. And so having an orientation to drive toward equity is also very important in terms of characteristics of a fellow. And then, as you heard from the alumni fellows, that you're open to the personal growth experience that comes along with this opportunity. And so really want folks who want to maximize the chance and the opportunity that they're given, and will put in the time and the work and be fully in. I think that's what we're looking for. So with that, I think we can now shift to questions that you may have, and I'm going to ask Allie to just maybe share some of the questions that folks have.
Thanks, Barbara. Thanks, everyone, for submitting your questions in the chat box. As you mentioned, Barbara, you didn't ask the fellows explicitly about equity, but the folks on the call have. So I'm going to share one of those questions first. So this one is for the fellows. How has the fellowship experience helped you address systemic inequities and possibly change organizational culture that may perpetuate those inequities?
Esther, you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. One of the core components of results count is acting on disparities. So in terms of equity, that is a core competency within the results count frame. And a lot of the tools that you'll be given, or you will build your muscles around, really focus on that notion, disaggregating data, looking at factors that have disadvantaged certain groups of people over others. So, it's a real competency that is embedded in the frame. And so, it has translated inside our organization, similarly, in terms of, really around race and equity for us, and has made us extremely thoughtful, not only about how the intentionality of the work, but in terms of the conversations that we have inside the organization.
Maybe in the interest of time, we'll go through the questions, and I won't have both the fellows answer everyone, so we can get some more questions in. So Allie, do you have another one?
Yep, and this one is for you, Barbara. How did the fellowship adjust for the pandemic, and what learnings or experiences from that are being adopted for future classes?
Good question. So our most recent class, the one that Charles and Sarah were in, we did have to shift probably the last third of the fellowship, really, from April on, to being done virtually. And it was a challenge. We were shifting in all the leadership work that we were doing to doing it virtually. And we learned a lot. We learned what works and what doesn't work. As a result of that, you'll see in the schedule that 2 of the 11 seminars now are going to be virtual seminars instead of all of them being in person. And that stems from what we've learned about how to use a virtual container to advance work. And so that's been embedded in there. There also have been some other, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds of this, but some techniques that we've learned by doing virtual work that we're now contemplating will find their way into the fellowship, whether it's in person or for the virtual sessions, that I think have really facilitated learning and connection and that sort of thing. So there has been some impact. Our team has been constantly over the last, 15 months or so, trying to examine our own learning, both for the fellowship as well as our other leadership programs.
Thanks, Barbara.
Sure.
Another one for the fellows. Can you give an example of when you were pushed in your thinking during the program and how that has led to better outcomes for the community?
Charles, do you want to go with that one?
Yes, I'm thinking about being pushed around, being bold around equitable results, being pushed by the faculty as well as my peers, and the way it showed up in my work. I'm thinking about the COVID-19 response, where CPS reports went down dramatically, and we were really being pushed by our local school system to for children that had not logged into remote learning to create child protective services reports. And I was really bold in my leadership to say, how could we do this differently? Knowing that COVID-19 had really impacted Black and Brown families, that our response should be more of support rather than surveillance. So we were able to partner with our school team, our school system, to develop street teams that went door to door and trying to find these kids and offering support, finding out why they weren't logging on, rather than turning it into a potential abuse or really a neglect situation. So really giving me the confidence in my leadership to really challenge folks on how do we respond and support families rather than surveil families and assume that the worst is happening, and how do we provide them support.
Thank you.
The next one is for Barbara. Can you say a little bit more about the youth and young adult result overlay that all youth ages 16 to 24 in the United States have bright futures, and what that means for candidates whose primary population are a different group, such as younger kids?
Sure, and I'm very glad that that question got asked. For those of you who follow the work of the Casey Foundation, you'll know that this year we publicly announced the intention of the foundation to focus in a very targeted way on improved outcomes for older youth and young adults, through that 14 to 24-year-old age group. The public announcement was made this year, but internally we knew that that was in the works. Staff have been sort of grappling with that and how it was going to change and pivot our work for the last couple of years. And so with the last fellowship class, and now again with this upcoming one, we created the overlay result of improved outcomes for older youth, and in the application, as well as in the fellowship experience, found times to ask fellows to focus in on the contribution that they're able to make to improved outcomes for older youth, regardless of what their current work is. So for example, if you're in early childhood, the application question would be, or the response to that application question would be about how you're able to see a line from the work that you do to improve outcomes at an early age to having a contribution on the outcomes for older youth. So we're not looking to narrow the field of candidates for the fellowship to say you have to be doing youth and young adult work, but instead we do want people to be able to see from wherever they are the contribution that the work that they do makes to improved outcomes for older youth, and be able to sort of draw that dotted line from whatever work they're doing to that and those outcomes. So I hope that helps. Any other questions, Allison, before we go to wrapping this up? I didn't know if you had a final one.
There's one about speaking a little bit more to the experience of, what the work looks like in the fellowship. So is there a lot of testing? Is it project-based learning? Is there a capstone project? Those kinds of things.
So there's not a capstone project. All fellows are asked early on in the process to identify a result that they want to be focused on and a body of work that they will be focusing on throughout the 21 months of the fellowship term, and to move that body of work toward improved outcomes. So that becomes the basis of what we call a results action plan. And you'll be building this plan over the 21 months, and you'll be refining it and reworking it, and maybe even throwing, version 1 out the window and starting again. But that is really the focus of the work. We want it to be real work that folks are bringing into the fellowship experience, not something made up or academic, but actual work that you and your stakeholders and partners back home are trying to move the needle on, and to bring that into the fellowship experience. There are other things like assessments that we use, but the real core of the work is this results action plan. So I think we've hit our time boundary. And again, we want to make sure that people know that we welcome all your questions. I know we may not have gotten to all of them, but if you have any follow-up questions for us, please reach out to either Allie or to me. We're perfectly happy and very, very willing and interested in responding to them, because I know this is a big decision for folks. And we just want to make sure that you're getting all of your questions answered. So don't think you're bothering us at all by reaching out. We're happy to either talk to you or correspond by email. So with that, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank our panelists, our alumni fellows for joining us, the support from Allie and Carol for the webinar, and then to all of you who've participated, and good luck. We're looking forward to having the opportunity to learning more about you through your applications, and to see what happens. And hopefully we'll see some of you in person at the finalist interviews. So thank you very much for your time. Thanks, everybody.